And welcome in to another episode of the Young Dad Podcast. Whether you're outside grilling, maybe you're mowing the lawn, maybe you're changing dirty diapers, or maybe you finally got a minute to sit back, relax, and to crack them with a cold one and listen to your favorite podcast. So whatever you're doing, wherever you're at, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Jey. Super excited to be with you for another episode today. Whatever time of day it is that you're listening to this, whatever day of the week it is. I'm joined by Suzie. Suzie, how are you this evening? It's evening for us while we're recording this, but the listeners didn't need to know that. So
I am doing really good. I just got my kids into bed, which means it is normally time to relax, but it's super exciting to be here. So thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate you giving up mom time for myself. Do appreciate that.
I feel like I had a glass of wine with me, but that's okay.
You should, and I wish I had a cold cider right now. That would be best case, but maybe next time. We've been trying to nail this down for a little bit now, trying to get connected here, so I'm super excited that we got to connect. So a little bit about you for the listeners. I'm going to give them a little kind of teaser intro here. You have become obsessed with helping others to create a birth they love, a birth where they feel safe, seen, heard, and empowered. But the change from feeling overwhelmed and scared about birth to finding it one of life's most defining and beautiful moments didn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. The transformation wasn't an overnight change for you, but it was a journey involving loss, heartache, growth, and ultimately joy. And we're going to jump into that quite a bit today, so I'm super excited. But before we do, just a little bit of the business here at the top, as we see in the industry here. Got to shout out the partners of the podcast. I don't like to call them sponsors or affiliates or anything like that. I like to call them partners because they're partners of mine who I appreciate and who I work with and who I'm super close to, just on our relationship level as well. So first, shout out to my man Nick and the crew over at Four Fathers Apparel. Four Fathers Apparel, changing the way that dads dress, making us look good, feel good, start conversations with our shirts. Best performing material, light, breathable, great, stylish, good looking, all the things. Use code YoungDad20, save yourself some money on your purchase. Next is Dad Bod Apparel. I'm rocking the Dad Vibes hat today. Does it say Dad Vibes? It does.
It looks amazing, by the way.
It says Dad Vibes right over there. The bill, it's all decked out. Absolutely love Dad Bod Apparel. Fantastic. Use the code YoungDad15, save 15%. And then, of course, we have my man, Dr. Harrell, my own personal coach, trainer. He's got me right. He'll do the same for you. Find a discount code in that as well. And then last but not least, the Joon app, Joon. We'll talk about that more close toward the end of the podcast. And of course, the opening and closing beats that you hear are from the Podbeat app. So that's enough of the business. Without further ado, I'm going to take you through, Suzie, I'm going to go through your story here. And wherever you want to stop and expand, please go ahead and do so. So first, we'll go back to 2011, right? When Suzie was, would it be mean to say you were a good little Mormon girl?
No, that's
would
actually
that be mean?
Like a very, very accurate description. I was not, and then I transferred. I went to a party school my freshman year of college, and then I was trying to maybe get back in my family's good graces. And so I went to BYU and just tried to do like all the BYU things, got married when I was super young, had my first kid, had kids super young, a miscarriage, had a lot of medical problems from that, cancer scare due to like this crazy pregnancy thing that was not quite a pregnancy. I don't.
Yeah, no, so that's awesome. So, it's safe to assume that you were raised Mormon.
Yes.
Kind of. Okay. As was I for majority of my childhood. So that's where we have something in common there. We're also both not Mormon anymore. And so you went to BYU University. You got your bachelor's in economics. Mm-hmm. So we're starting on the economics path, numbers, things like that. You fell in love with numbers and how information can shape our public and personal health, which is really cool. Numbers are really cool. I love statistics about mental health and all those fun things, even though I failed econ twice when I was in college. Hence why I went the mental health and psychology route, so I don't have to do a lot of math. But ultimately, you landed at an investment bank. And then were you married by the time you had graduated?
Yes, I got married shortly before I
Okay.
graduated. I actually was planning
Okay.
on becoming an actuary. I actually love numbers. Actuaries are the people that kind of determine the risk and like all these crazy things for insurance. But after I got married, one of us needed to pay the bills. He was still in school, so I could graduate. So I did and went into to work at an investment bank, basically. So
Okay.
that was that.
Makes sense. And then it's 2012. You announce your first pregnancy,
Hmm.
plus experience your first difficulties with getting the care you needed. So 2012, it was 12 years ago. Crazy to think that that was only 12 years ago, but it was so different 12 years ago in this space with kids and marriage and everything. And that's just 12 years ago, barely more than a decade. You lost this pregnancy, and you then experienced your medical complications following. And so yeah, what that first pregnancy, you lost that first pregnancy. And so you're approximately what, 22, 23 years old ish,
Mhm.
super
Yeah,
young,
yeah,
been
I
married
didn't
for,
feel young at the
not
time.
super
I'd been
long
married a few
probably.
years, so it felt like the
Okay.
next right step.
Hmm.
And I'm a doula now, so like walking people through this part of life is what I do, and I think it's important to know that like you're not alone in this journey because I remember when I went through that loss, feeling like very much like I was the only one that experienced miscarriage when really most people do. And then I actually had this thing called a molar pregnancy, which the placenta in that grows kind of cancerously. And so it was also like not just like a pregnancy that wasn't viable, it was also like a cancer scare too, which was very, I had to be monitored for about a year before I was like, my body was like recognizing I wasn't pregnant anymore, even though I wasn't pregnant during that year. It was very strange. But one of the things with
That's
that
crazy.
was I really struggled in getting the care I needed because even though I was sick, like so often women are dismissed in pregnancy. I remember going
Hmm.
to my doctor and saying, like, look, I know a lot of people get sick during pregnancy, but this doesn't seem normal to me. Like, I feel like I'm past that threshold. And it was like my voice kept getting dismissed. And I see that happen to a lot of people who are like, look, I think something's wrong. And it's like, oh no, that's pregnancy. It's normal. Oh no, it's pregnancy. It's normal. Oh no, it's pregnancy. It's normal. And so the reason that's such an important part of the story is because I was into my second trimester before I could even get an ultrasound to find out what was going on. And if that pregnancy, like, that's when I found out, like, okay, I'm actually like, I'm pregnant, but I'm not growing a baby, which is a strange concept. And so even though that specific complication is pretty rare, there's not a ton of people who have it's called a molar pregnancy. It is pretty common for people to go through the birth process and say, like, feel like they weren't heard or they were being asked to make decisions where they didn't feel empowered or that they just don't really necessarily are having a hard time connecting with the information and turning that information or that knowledge into action with their provider, whether it's accessing care they need or whether it's avoiding care that's kind of like an unnecessary intervention on the other side.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because if you look at kind of how you and I were both raised, right?
Mhm.
It's not something that's really talked about, the ugly side of it all. Because all you really hear about and see is just healthy pregnancies, babies, all the things, right? It's like every other Sunday there's a baby blessing at church, and there's all these things, and it's
It's
just
supposed to be
this
so
this part's
joyful.
not. Yeah, it's supposed to be a joyful experience, but the care. So are you still living in Utah at this time, right?
No, I'm in Seattle now. I
Okay,
love
so
it
you're
in Seattle. Yeah.
okay. I mean, for the first pregnancy.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So during that pregnancy, I was in.
Okay. And so my first experience with pregnancy and that whole system was in Idaho. So a pretty similar landscape, more or less.
Mhm.
But yeah, the care that's needed, and it's very common even today. It's still very common to where there's not a there's a big gap in information given and information kind of pre-known. And then that gap is everything that's kind of written off and kind of chopped up just to pregnancy and to just how things are.
Yeah.
And so there's a big gap there.
How many things are considered normal in pregnancy where it's like, wait, you don't actually have to like suffer through that, like there's just so many things that are considered normal that are like, okay, maybe it's common, but that's not how things have to be.
Yeah, exactly. Like they shouldn't be at this level of normality to where you're suffering through this process and there's something wrong because you know your body best. You've been in your body for, all these years. Like you should, when something's wrong. And so we go from that first pregnancy, the intense medical care for the next year. And then in 2014, you deliver your daughter, Zoe, by emergency C-section.
Yeah.
The initial feeling, or there was an overwhelming feeling, was this is hard and scary. Birth is dangerous, which neither of my kids were born by a C-section, thankfully, but I have seen it, heard it, it's happened in my family, and that would be so scary, literally being cut and then everything removed and then put back in. At least that's how I imagine it. Just everything, like cutting you open, taking everything out, putting to the side, taking the baby out, putting everything back in, stitching you up, and sending you on your merry way in a couple days.
Yeah, I mean, C-sections are really brutal. I think that, they're so common. It's like 1 in 3 people, more than 1 in 3 people now give birth via surgery. It's like, oh, not a big deal because it happens all the time. But if you watch a surgery, like they literally take organs out of your body and move them to the side, and then they stuff them back in, and they're going through 7 different layers of your body, and the recovery is not necessarily easy either. For me, it was like an overwhelming sense of, it was hard to understand how I got there, right? Because I had gone from a pregnancy that was so not right to then a pregnancy where everything was so easy. And then the birth seemed so like it was unfolding so great. And then all of a sudden we were in this medical emergency. And there again was like lack of communication, like I truly believe that, whether we were or were not in a medical emergency, I will never know because I can't go back in time with all the experience I have now. But I do know for sure that the team that cared for me could have cared more about my emotional state and what I knew about what was going on and helped me kind of process what I was going on. So it could be something that like a choice that I made to have a surgery because I knew it was what was best for me and my baby versus something that happened to me because they said I needed it. Which, as a doula, helping that relationship and that knowledge exchange and those conversations happen is really part of the job that we have. But unfortunately, like I believe that should be a right everybody has. It just unfortunately isn't always given.
Yeah, no, I agree. It should be. I mean, there's this thing called informed consent in all medical agencies, right? There's a right to know. There's a right to know how something may benefit you versus the other side of it. The risk reward of everything that you can do, right? And that shouldn't have to just be common knowledge going into it, right? Because this is your first birth, second pregnancy, but your first birth. And so becoming a first-time mom, like there's only so much that you're going to know, mid-20s kind of thing. Like you're not going to know that much. I mean, even for me as a dad, like I became a dad when I was 22, right? Like I didn't know a lot.
Yeah. When
I was super young.
A lot of times informed consent is something that I talk about with my clients. And it's often like a new phrase. Like I feel people are like, what's that mean? How did you come to like know that term enough that you can just kind of like it rolls off the tip of your tongue? Like
I guess now like I know it because I work in mental health. I'm a mental health clinician. And so I'm always giving out informed consent forms, going over informed consent. And it's just kind of the the common practices, I mean, everywhere you go to the doctors, you're signing an informed consent of some type for privacy, for record keeping, for confidentiality, for termination of services, for all these things. It's probably one sheet that has multiple signatures on it. They ask you if you want a copy of it, and then you say no, and they're like, cool, I wasn't going to give you one anyway, and then, move on kind of thing. So,
Yeah. Can I ask you another
it's
question?
kind of just put as something like, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things that like I also like try to differentiate between is like what is true informed consent, like having the conversation versus signing a document that says you had the conversation.
Mhm.
Do you ever see like when you're in your practice or in the groups that you work with that there's a difference between the form and the conversation that happens, or like the difference
Most
between
definitely. Yeah, most definitely. Like, I feel like a lot of people, like when I do try to have the conversation of the informed consent form, because I do all of our, most of our intakes for the program I work in. And so I'm always going over the informed consent form with youth and families. And I feel like a lot of times parents just kind of want to sign it and they don't want to hear it because it's like, well, we signed these before, it's nothing new kind of thing. But it's like, no, like I really need to highlight you know, the termination of services, things like this, the no-shows, these different parts of it. And I really need to highlight this, zero tolerance policy. I need to highlight this policy. Like, these are the ones that like, I really need to have a conversation with you about and let you know. And so
because
that
what
helps
happens if
them just
people don't
feel,
have those conversations, right? And then there's a
yeah,
surprise down the road with one of those things. It
yeah.
always,
It's like, oh, well, you signed it.
yeah, yeah. I feel like that happens in birth all the time. Like a lot of times if I'm with one of my clients and they're like signing the form, there's like, okay, well, let's like stop here for a moment. Like this is a place to press pause and make sure we understand what you're signing, why you're signing. It
Hmm.
can be a truly scary thing to like talk about the risks and benefits. I think that's a very emotional thing to even process. Like there are risks in moving forwards in any way in birth, but it's also really important because you can't, like, one of the things I learned through all of my drama is that like those risks and benefits exist whether you want to acknowledge them or not. So it's much better to like process them and think about them, and then you can have like an educated choice in how you move forwards that reflects your values and who you are, much better than if it's just like, okay, I'm going to sign the form and blindly follow.
100%. And it's really easy for even like myself. I've felt myself doing it at points. It's like I'm going through this paperwork, I'm answering the risks and things like that. And I feel like the way I'm explaining it is almost scary or off-putting in some way, shape, or form. So it may feel intimidating to the client, it may feel scary to the client, it may feel, uh, you know, something to the client. Ultimately, I've never had one that went sideways or anything like that, but I feel like within the sphere of birth and whatnot, like when you're talking about the risks like for your child and birth and things like that, like it's very easy to scare, especially a first time mother,
Yes.
especially a mother who's young, and or a mother who's, in the LDS culture who may be really naive to all this. I mean, this is her first pregnancy and she probably just started having sex 9 months ago, you know? And so it's
There's like
like
so little time
she's
to
never
even gain
even,
awareness of your own body and what you need and
yeah,
what you need as a human being as a yeah.
yeah, and yeah, she's still probably, first time mother coming from LDS culture, you know, she's probably still never had a what, uh,
Mhm.
kind of thing. Doesn't know what's going on, doesn't understand these things, doesn't understand like, okay, what are the symptoms kind of thing? What do I need to look out for? Oh, these things hurt or I'm sick, but maybe I'm just sick kind of thing. And, so there's that lack of like getting care and finding care because it's like you just don't think anything of it. You're like, oh, I'm just sick. I ate some bad food or something. You just go about your life kind of thing. And so like that lack of education coming from a cultural standpoint is also really important, right? Like it's mind blowing, but I mean it's still happening, today, every day. So
Mhm.
um but that's a big part of it. No, where you came from and where the culture you were raised in, how much they talked about sex and pregnancy and the information that you already kind of had growing up, so that it wasn't like a scary thing, so it wasn't like a foreign concept, so it wasn't like a thing. And so
Well, one of the things
it's
I love about what you're saying is that it's important to know where we're coming from because, when I think about my education for childbirth, I really felt like, there were some things like in my molar pregnancy when I was sick, I could see that I was sicker than my peers. Like it was so obvious. Like, people talk about throwing up in the shower in the mornings. Yes, that was happening. But like one time I was like driving home from work and I was so tired, like so tired. I was like, I cannot keep my eyes open for this 15-minute drive back to my apartment. And my husband at the time, was out of town and I pulled over and stopped at Walmart because it was a parking lot. And like the minute that I parked the car, I fell asleep and I slept there for like 5 hours. And I woke up and I was like, I cannot believe I'm still here. And then I didn't even have enough energy. I was like, I really need to get I think at that point in time I could eat the only thing I could keep down was like Lucky Charms. And I was eating maybe like a cup a day. I was like losing a lot of weight. And I was like, none of this is normal. And I can see it's not normal. And I can feel it's not normal. And yet when I'm saying I'm sick to my provider, they're saying it's normal and to tough it out a little bit. Right. And so I think because I was in very much a culture that one believed everything in pregnancy is normal, like just tough it out was kind of like, it's your purpose to have babies, right? It's okay if it's hard. It's okay if you suffer during it. It's okay if it takes your identity.
And all those providers of our,
but it's really not.
And even all those providers are the same culture, right?
Yeah.
So it's like they don't. There's so much bias within that too.
Yeah. And so it's really important, I think, like one of the things that I've had to learn and that, even in Seattle, like I don't live in Utah anymore, but people get dismissed all the time. And, like one of the things that will happen a lot with my clients is they'll say to me something like, I'm feeling really tired. Is this normal? And, they'll say like, I went to my appointment with my doctor, my midwife, and they said, don't worry about it. And so then like I have to fill in for them. I'm like, well, did you ask them about anemia? Did they check for anemia? Did they run any tests? Did they, and it ends up being me, who's not medically trained in any of these things, but am kind of a protector of that right of informed consent and am kind of a guide, telling them to like go back and use your voice. And this is how you use your voice. And these are the things that you can ask for that you deserve. And yet, like doulas can only do so much because I can't run the test, right? But I can recognize like, okay, that might be anemia, it might be something else, it might be normal, but I do know that from what you're telling me, this question hasn't been investigated yet, which you deserve to have investigated.
Yeah, 100%. So having that advocate on your side is really important. So speaking of advocacy, that moves us kind of into 2024, or my goodness, 2014, through kind of 2018. So 2014, you joined a mom's group where you became friends with a student midwife. She changed the definition of quality care and opened your eyes to how different birth could be when it is given. To this day, you believe in quality care requires trust, and trust equals authenticity, empathy, logic, and follow through. And then when those principles are implied in birth, you simply get better outcomes for everyone. Today, as a patient advocate and a doula, you love helping moms develop this type of relationship with their care providers. And then that was, seen through 2015 to 2018 as well, where you spent the next several years leading Hike It baby groups, which is really cool. You met hundreds of moms and realized that your experiences, though rough, were actually not so bad. You felt deeply that there was both a need for change and a path to better, safer births. You were riveted by the stories that you heard there and felt compelled to be part of the change. And so you wanted a safer world for your own daughter when she grew up. And you strongly believe that one piece of the puzzle is better care, is helping moms develop knowledge and skills that allow them to enter, I can't read tonight, enter the better process with more confidence. And so that right there, entering the process with more confidence, entering it with more knowledge, more confidence, someone on your side, someone who's educating you, someone who's kind of giving you that gentle nudge, like, hey, say something, because if it's not the mom saying it, it should be the dad who's there and knows, like, hey, there's something off with my wife. I would 100% say that the buck should stop with the husband. And then if dads, if you're out there, if you're listening, whether your husband, boyfriend, whatever your role is in it, you're the baby's father, you
Baby
should be
daddy,
at those appointments. And
all form. We
yeah,
love you.
right. And so you should be involved in those appointments, or involved enough to know what's going on with the mother of your child, so that you can be there and, speak up.
Yeah.
Because especially if it's like a typical OB kind of doctor, he walks in, of course, there's a power dynamic there because of gender and role and things like that. And I've been doing this for 20 years, blah, 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 all this yada, 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 yada bullshit. And, he's not going to listen to the mother. Well, that's normal, blah, 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 blah. But if you as a dad, you're there and you're speaking up and you're saying, hey, no, listen to me, Dr. Full of Shit, you're wrong. And this is something that's been going on for the last 3 weeks. It's not getting no better. It's getting worse. Like, do something. We're not leaving here till we do something, kind of thing. Because, as a pregnant woman, you're in a very vulnerable position. It's hard to speak up. It's hard to advocate for yourself, especially if you don't have the knowledge of what you're supposed to be advocating for. So having someone, preferably the baby daddy there, whatever role he's filling, to speak up is really important. And so to be involved in that process is, kind of really freaking important.
Well, birth is really hard on relationships too. It transforms the relationships, but because there's so much opportunity for women to experience trauma, and so much then falls on a dad who has no training in birth and who has no, even if you take, I think it's a really great thing for every couple to take a birth class together, because then you're on the same page, and that typically gives a lot of a lot of like connection points. But even if you have those, even if you're the type of dad that reads the book and that is doing their best to show up, it's still like, this is your first baby. It's your first baby, or, it's your first time through this process. So it's a lot on your shoulders.
There's a huge knowledge gap, right?
Yeah.
Like, at least not most women, some women will have, an idea, maybe a mom's group or something, or have a space where they can go and ask, right? Maybe, some, probably like a 40-60 split, probably 40% do, 60 don't. Hopefully those numbers are better though. But for men, it's like 80-20, but the wrong way. It's maybe 20% that do, and that's being incredibly generous, versus 80% that don't, have no idea, that are just kind of going into it like, cool, whatever you say sounds great, sounds cool. And so there's a huge disparity in knowledge for both a mother and for a father.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, in my childbirth class, when I work with couples, one of the things that I always teach them about is the different roles that dads can play and the different needs that moms might have. And what do you do if, say, like a dad is really skilled in one area, but a mom has more strong needs in this area? Like, how do you fill the gap and kind of come together? Like we talk about how, like, there's different ways to approach birth as a team. One being like, one woman might look towards their partner, their husband, their baby daddy, whoever it is, as a coach, somebody that she wants to like protect them, be looking always towards the next step, reminding them to do things like get the water, let's go for a walk, let's get to the hospital on time, let's, checking off all the boxes like that. Another mom might want someone to just be there with her that's like present and in the game. Like, hey, you don't have to know what to do if things go wrong. I just want you here by my side. And some moms just need somebody to like witness them go through the process and to hold space, which means like for some dads who have partners like this that need a lot of space but also attention, birth can be extraordinarily boring because you can't really actually be that active, but you cannot be on your phone, right? Which is like usually how we pass
Mm-hmm.
time. And it can be really hard to just sit there watching somebody either, if they have an epidural and they're not in pain, and they're a little anxious, but they don't want to do anything to distract them, or someone that's working through contractions, but is like, don't touch me, don't talk to me, but stay here next to me. Like those are all difficult things for dads. Difficult. What's the right way to say this? Because it's not as difficult as handling the contraction, but it is also like a lot to ask when you're considering like birth can take a while. When you think about
Yeah.
yeah,
It's difficult to be like present in that moment, right? It's difficult to stay like, because it's like, okay, you want me, but you don't want me. But it's like at the same time, I guess to kind of backtrack on that, like you don't know what you're gonna need until you're like in that moment, right? But this can also be a really long process, right?
literally.
My ex-wife gave birth to our first one. I want to say that was like a 26-hour labor or something. It was so long. It was so long.
Did it start
And so like
during the day, like after you had a nice night's sleep, or was it kind of like, all right, we're getting ready for bed, and then the 26 hours starts there?
I think it was more like day into night,
Okay.
slept and kind of thing. I don't
To the
remember.
next day, yeah.
It was like 7 years ago. I'm not gonna remember that. I was there. Again, I'm
It's a
like
long haul,
22.
though. It really is.
I don't even know what the fuck is going on. Like I just remember being like so nervous. I remember at one point like I got so frustrated with like the doctor because they weren't listening to either one of us. So I ended up like cussing at a nurse and like walking out of the room for a bit and just got like so frustrated and flustered and overwhelmed by the situation because it's so overwhelming and so flustering. I don't think I've ever shared that on the podcast before, but it's like a whole thing. It's just like I don't know what to do. Like I don't know what you need. Like you're not telling me what you need, but you're telling me what it's like I don't know how to fill that need. And so you can practice all day long. Okay, yeah, I think I'm gonna need this. I'm gonna need you to support this way. When you're actually in the heat of the moment, and those contractions are going every minute or 45 seconds or whatever, and they're getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and the dilation is happening, and the pit and whatever else is kicking in, and dilation, all that fun stuff, and you're getting closer and closer. Like stakes get higher and higher.
Yeah.
Everything you practice is out the window. Everything you practice, everything you said, everything you thought's out the window. And so it's just like, and then like at the time my first one was born, I was running a restaurant. I was the general manager. And so it was like my phone's going off and like there's stuff going down. I'm trying to call people in, get stuff covered and move things around and all this stuff. And so I'm trying to handle business and life and do all the things. And it was so like, there's just so much all at the same time. And so it was crazy. So it's like you don't really know like what's going to be needed until you're, in the process, until the stakes are high. But you're not. No one's prepared to handle those high stakes.
It's really hard too. Like I heard you say a
some
couple times, like the Pitocin, the medicine that makes the contractions stronger. Like even as a doula, there are times where I am like, I do not know how to support you anymore because I can see that the Pitocin, like these contractions have left the realm of like normal intensity of what a normal, like spontaneous, started on its own, straightforward labor would be. And so like, the options then become like, can we turn this down? Would your labor still continue with the pain, the edge being taken off? It might for some people, it might not for others. Like, then, do you need to change a birth plan? Do you need an epidural? Do you need the anesthesiologist to change something on the epidural to get the dose right? Like, there's so many like little things that happen, especially when Pitocin is involved, where it's just like, I've been to literally hundreds of births and I still get overwhelmed in Pitocin moments. So I just like hope that as a dad, you're like, probably did way better than I think, because that is a hard situation for everybody.
Yeah, no, 100%. No, the first one I did terrible. I did absolutely terrible. I was the fucking worst.
Would you do anything
I'll
different,
admit
or do
that
you have any
100%.
like advice that you're like, oh, I wish I could tell myself like in retrospect?
My second one was a lot better. Like I prepared myself more because I knew what it was going to be like, right? I knew that I needed to have my own distractions. I needed to have my own things to do if it was going to take a while. I needed to, but my second one was born during COVID. Like my second one was born in
Oh,
2020, like
wow.
November 2020. And so but I knew, and then my divorce was literally like 4 or 5 months later. And so, it was the whole thing, really speaks to how children and birth and those experiences really change your relationship, and not always for the better.
Yeah,
Um,
what's true, most
and
people that go through birth, like most couples, their happiness goes really far down. Only about 30% of people say that their relationship stays the same or gets better. And I like from my perspective as a doula and somebody through a very similar path, right? Like I got divorced shortly after my second child too. And like when I look back at the trauma experienced in those things, it's like even if we had been a really compatible couple, could we stay compatible after trauma like we experienced in labor? And I'm not sure anybody, no matter how strong they were, could have come back from those experiences and not blamed each other in some way. It breaks things
yeah,
sometimes.
no,
Sorry, I know that's kind of like
yeah,
too
no,
honest, but
no, not at all. It's good. It's good it's because it's true. It's only the truth. It can definitely change a lot of things. It can be a very high intensity kind of moment. And a lot of things going on, and a lot of, trauma can happen during those times. And, there's some things that you can't really come back from and that you can't really move past. And so, you're able to kind of recognize exactly where things are and, you know, kind of take them for what they are. There were other factors for myself during the pregnancy and then after that led to the divorce and things like that. So it wasn't just the birth itself of my second daughter. It was a culmination of things. There's a lot of things. Um, but what I would have done differently the first time is I would have just been more prepared to keep myself entertained, to keep myself busy, um, to stay like because I can stay busy, but as long as I have something like keep me going during the like, okay, you need me, I'm over here. You don't need me right now, okay, I'm over here. Okay, you need me, cool. Okay, if you don't need me, cool, I'm over here. Kind of thing where it's like I can put something down, pick something up, and go back and forth kind of thing to
hmm
keep myself, just blatantly entertained, first and foremost. So that was my biggest thing. Like for me, is just being able to be there, but also be able to check out, check in, check out, check in, just to kind
yeah,
of cope throughout the situation, kind of thing.
yeah.
So
It's a
knowing your
really
coping
tricky
skills,
balance,
knowing
like
some coping skills.
yeah, it's very tricky to find the balance between, needing to be present and needing to give space. And how do you give space and be present at the same time is one of the difficult things that is asked of dads in labor. It's like they seem like completely opposite things and you have to do both.
Yeah,
It's not
no, and they don't work together.
yeah,
But it is what it is. We're flexible. You just got to adapt to the situation,
yeah. So
and,
it's
you
a
have to be willing
really cool
to check out
so
too.
yeah. You just reminded me of like a really cool study where they looked at like what doulas did differently than dads. And one of the things the study was actually cool in the sense that it found that like women who had doulas, their relationships actually like were closer. And they found that when doulas were involved, doulas were like would usually take a dad and place him closer to a woman in labor, which is something that I do a lot where I'm like, wait, you're needed right here. And I'm like, okay, put your hand here, or like I'll tell a woman like, okay, now like put your arms around and like slow dance. And dad, this is like where you squeeze the hips and things like that. But then sometimes like I'll watch a dad try to do something like hip compresses, like they're trying really hard. They're doing everything they learned in their childbirth class. And the mom will be like, no, I hate it. And then I'll do the same thing. And she's like, okay, it's fine. And I don't know if that's like differences and like another thing that I think that dads should be like just aware of is that since you are the closest person emotionally to the woman in labor, that it's possible that the
Hopefully,
anger is direct.
hopefully,
The anger of yeah, hopefully. Like you're the safest person for her to share her like pain and dissatisfaction with, which is not that necessarily
mm,
that she's dissatisfied in you, but that it's a hard process. And so often the way that that's communicated, I will see dads like shut down from that feedback. And I'm like, no, 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 no. She's not mad at you. It's like when a toddler is like at school and does great and then comes home from school or preschool and they see their mom and they're like screaming. It's because they're finally in a place safe enough to let out all the crazy. And that happens in labor
Yeah.
sometimes. And I think dads need to know that. Like sometimes when a woman is like really mad at you in labor, or like when you feel like I'm doing everything and it's not working, why am I not? It's truly because you're the safe place. And so sometimes like I truly think dads need to know, like, if you're being present and she's like upset, a lot of times it's because you're the safe place to let those feelings out. So I don't know if that helps anybody, but I see it all the time.
No,
So
no, I
it
love that
doesn't usually
analogy
come
there.
out, which is a
Yeah,
natural.
100%, 100%. And I love that analogy, like with the toddler that, or the child that comes home and has a great day, and then all of a sudden just lets everything go when they get home. So at home they're terrible, but at school they're great, or here they're awesome, and at home they're terrible, kind of thing. Something I deal with every single day, kind of thing. And it is that part of it. It's like where they feel really safe, they feel comfortable, so that they can, kind of unmask a little bit. It's very common with
Mhm.
children with autism, very common with children with complex behavioral needs and things like that, where it's just that unmasking, all those things just kind of come down, everything comes down. So everything that they were holding in is now coming out.
Yeah. It can feel
So,
really, it's like I'm trying to find the right words because I feel it with my kids and then I see it. And sometimes it's me, like in the labor room that those emotions come towards, but more often it's the dad. But it's like, I mean, I just love the way that you said, like, it's an unmasking. And it's so important, like, to learn to not internalize. Like, it's actually like a huge sign of trust when that unmasking happens, not a sign of like you failed, which is, I think, something that I see a lot is the shutdown that happens after the unmasking, which is actually a time when, as the woman, you need somebody to like just put their arms around you and tell you you're going to be okay and be like so present in that moment. But it's nearly impossible.
yeah.
Like, I mean, it's again one of the many difficulties of managing a labor.
Yeah, no, and it goes, directly up this path, like you said, where you're, as a man, like it's very easy to quickly internalize that, take it personal, feel bad, like, okay, I caused this, I'm to blame for this, it's all my fault, and take all those things on, and to feel the shame and the guilt of the situation, right? Which is
Mhm.
why it's important. One thing I believe is that personally, that would be super helpful for a lot of couples, super helpful for a lot of men, is having, you know, counseling and mental health services during the pregnancy. Like
Yes.
just having specific counselors during pregnancy to help both the mother, father, and them as a couple, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that needs to look like, make it happen, right? So that, you can catch, because, well, I guess before I get to that, I'm going to get through the rest of your story here, and then I'll come back to that point. But 2018, you had your second daughter, Hazel. It was an incredible, powerful experience. You wrote your first book, Divine Birth, a collection of inspiration to help moms work through their anxieties and fears about birth. And then this was actually a water birth as well. It's really cute. Picture of your website. You can see
Thank
your
you.
older daughter in the water with you. I love that. And so that's super cool. And then 2019 to present, you began your doula certification with Birth Acts International, whom you're still certified with today. You also founded She Births Bravely, an organization aimed at providing moms quality information, compassionate care, and support through pregnancy and for the first 6 months after birth. After birth, which is huge. You've been a part of over 200 births, taking place in hospitals, homes, and birth centers. So super cool. You set up over 200 labor tubs for home births, taught hundreds of in your birth course, and there are 100 plus articles that you've written on this website as well, which is shebirthsbravely.com. And yeah, so it's super cool, huge reach, million moms, and you're working on your next book right now. At the time of this recording, correct?
I am. Yeah, it's all about inductions
Okay.
and the informed consent there. And just trying to give parents a guide of like, what are all the things that happen during an induction, and truly what are the risks and benefits of each thing that's offered. That's like a multi-step process that can be quite overwhelming.
Very cool. And so to kind of wrap back to what I was saying, so this is like the third conversation I've had in the last probably few weeks here on the podcast about like postpartum, pregnancy, these kind of conversations. So really interesting how all these things line up and work out. It's not a coincidence, of course. But so what I was saying with the postpartumness, right, or postpartum depression, is that it doesn't just, snap on after the baby's born, right? It doesn't just snap. It's not just, at least in my belief, in my research, and from the psychological standpoint of it, understanding how mental illness works, is that it's not really a snap all of a sudden. It's like baby's born, boom, brain's depressed. It's not really how it works. And postpartum depression is common in men and women. It's just more common so with women versus men. There's this dad group that I'm a part of.
More okay for women to talk about it than for men to talk about it.
Yes. Yeah, and that's mental health in general, right? That's just mental health in general, where it's more commonplace for women than it is men, which is a whole nother thing in itself, right? But I saw this post in this Bluey Dads group I'm part of, 100,000 bandits. Bluey's dad, if you're unfamiliar. If you're unfamiliar with Bluey and you're a dad and you're listening to this podcast, what are you doing? Go pay Disney for a Disney Plus membership and go start watching, laughing, and crying. And thank me later. But
parenting
so Bandit, Bluey, that's pretty much parenting 101. And if you want to be the best dad, you want to be Bandit. Bandit is the TV dad. And so also Bob Belcher. You mix Bandit and Bob Belcher, you're perfect. So, but there's this post in there, right? And this individual, they were anonymous, and they had posted like, I'm hating being a dad. I'm hating every moment of it. Like, I love my kids. They're great. They're fantastic. But I hate being a dad. I hate taking care of them. I hate doing these things. And so I commented up on there saying, brother, this sounds like it's postpartum depression. Babies, I think the youngest was maybe 2 years old kind of thing. And, it can happen during pregnancy. The signs and symptoms were probably there before in the mother or the individual of the depression. And then they were probably just heightened during pregnancy because of the added stress and all the things that came with it, the anxiety, the unknowns, all the things. So they were heightened during pregnancy. And then after birth, maybe they were heightened again. But, of course, for men, we have to kind of say, oh, well, it's not about me. It's about her. Take care of her. If mom's barely taken care of, then ain't no way in hell that the dad's even going to be asked about how they're feeling, how they're doing, anything like that. And then, these things can creep on 2-3 years down the line to where it all just kind of hits you. Work, family, all the stress, all the things, bills, all the things, responsibilities, all kind of just come crashing down all at once. And so it can be like a very overwhelming process that happens at this time. And so that's kind of where I would love to see the postpartum field go, is to prepartum, preventative care. Because I don't know the statistics when it comes to how many children pass away due to some kind of form of postpartum depression within the mother. I'm sure it's probably higher than either of us want to think about. It's higher than I want to think about. I want to say it's like 1 in a million.
Suicide is one of the leading causes of death for maternal mortality. So death within pregnancy, birth, and the year after. And one of the things I know about suicide is it's more common in men than women. So I haven't ever seen statistics on like suicide and numbers for men after in that first year after birth. But when we look at like our maternal mortality rates, that's a big problem. From what I know, from what I witness, from what I see in families, is that dads struggle too.
Absolutely. And so for men, so this is actually some of the things like that. So it's about a 4-to-1 ratio men to women, at least in the United States, that have a successful suicide. and they successfully commit suicide. But more women than men attempt suicide.
Oh,
So it's about
I did
a
not know
6 to
that.
4 ratio. Yeah, so it's about a 6 to 4 ratio or something like that. Maybe lower, but somewhere around those numbers. But more women attempt suicide. They just have less successful suicides because they use less lethal means, right? Or they're easier to be
Interesting.
talked out of it, or they go to someone saying, I'm doing this kind of thing right now, so they get talked out of it. So they attempt more often and more frequently than men. Men attempt once, but they go lethal. It's
Okay,
if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it right. I'm gonna get it done.
this is a very sad
Gunshots, blow your brains
conversation.
out,
Yeah.
things like that. And so it's very, very brutal. The most harmful ways you can think of, kind of thing. And so, but then you take that and you compound it with the highest population of at-risk men is ages, I want to say 37 to 40. No, 40. It's like early 40s to mid 50s. So middle-aged men, more or less. 37 to 52, kind of that range, middle age. If you think about it, they're the highest at risk. And why you think about, okay, what's going on in middle age for men? Well, men are having babies as they get older because we're not having children as young as we once were in our country. So the family stress starts to add on, the job stress starts to add on, the relationship stress starts to add on, divorce and all those things that come along the path as well. All play a factor in this. And so yeah, it's a you look deeper into it and you can start to see like some of the links here between the postpartumness and that as well. But I didn't know that, that was the leading cause of maternal death was suicide. But I mean, it makes sense because it's like
Really
you
sad.
don't want to hurt your baby, but I mean, you can hurt yourself. So
Yeah. Well, and I don't think like having a child is such a joyful event. And as my kids have grown, I feel like every year it gets a little sweeter and it gets a little better. But it's really hard when you come home from the hospital and all of a sudden, like a baby has to be fed every 2 or 3 hours,
mhm.
morning, night. Some of these like feeding plans that moms and babies get put on are like very rigorous if you're trying to breastfeed and it goes well, it's like, okay, it's still hard, but if it's not going well and your doctor puts you on feed for 40 minutes, pump for 20 minutes, um, so you're double feeding and then you have to clean the pump parts and do it every 3 hours. It's like, okay, now you're spending an hour and a half feeding your baby and you're repeating 8 times a day. It's really unsustainable. And I think there needs to be more conversation around like what are parents actually taking on? Because I know like, you know, when I look at like my generation versus my parents' generation, like my parents lived close to their parents, right? And like I remember as a child constantly like being at my grandmother's houses on both sides of my family. And like I feel like parents now, a lot of people do not, at least where I live, the families I work with, a lot of people do not have access to anybody really that's like watching out for them, or that's like on Fridays I go to grandma's house and she cooks dinner and I rest, or like there's I think an epidemic of people that are having to do everything without community support that used to maybe not be available to everybody, but that was more commonly built into family and social structures. Um, and I hope, like as a doula, I try to do what I can. Like I know my packages, I used to like just be there for birth. And now I do more prep because I want to work with the family and get them more ready for what's happening. And so we see each other longer for more meetings before. And then after, like for a lot of families, I'm doing 40, 60 hours of care where I'm like, okay, I'm going to cook all your meals. I'm going to teach you how to do the baby bath. I'm going to, like, you two are going to go sleep and I'm going to watch the baby and you're going to be okay. Like, after, because it was so hard to see people to like take somebody through the birth process, and even if you have a perfect birth that goes great, and then they hit that postpartum and they're like, like all of a sudden it can be so overwhelming. And some people go through it just fine, but for the people that like hit a wall at any one of those places, and then whatever trauma gets accumulated just gets buried because you have to take the next step, and every step is so urgent, seemingly, and sometimes is in that newborn period. It's very overwhelming. I truly wish what you suggested, like the postpartum care with counselors, therapists, centering groups, was just part of what everybody had access to.
Yeah. I wish it was more universal, and I wish it was more preventative. Our system of care in the United States is not preventative. It's all reactive medicine. It's like, oh, you tore your shoulder, you tore your rotator cuff, okay, you need surgery. Hold on, why is it only surgery? Why is surgery my only option? You said it was a small tear. Why can't I just rehab this or do something like that? Or why can't I get like a lasting treatment? Why can't I get stem cells to heal my back injury or neck injury or anything like this? Why aren't those preventative measures taken in place as like my long-term recovery option versus surgery? If you have one back surgery once, you're at a crazy higher risk to have another back surgery later, right? And so you're always setting yourself up for more and more and more care, because our system is just meant to have that reaction. And so if we took a more preventative approach, good.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, with like the rescue medicine. Okay, so to take your like back surgery example, you take somebody, you give them the back surgery, so you heal that one thing, but you go back into the same environment. So what was happening in your environment that caused you to develop that specific need is probably still there, right? And so you haven't actually fixed any of the structures or systems in your life that are leading to this specific problem.
Yeah. No, I agree. And another big problem with all of it is the disparity when it comes to opportunity and income and where you're at in society. So I looked it up here. I'm looking at the World Health Organization. So about 287,000 women died during and following pregnancy and childbirth in 2020. Almost 95% of all these maternal deaths occurred in low and lower middle income countries in 2020. So I believe that's a worldwide number. But that 95% means that, there was only 5% that, passed away that were from middle class or higher. Right. Yeah. And so there's a big opportunity. There's a huge knowledge gap, even when it comes for literacy, when it comes to financial awareness, when it comes to understanding, comprehension, things like that, nutrition, ability to get food. Shout out to LBJ for all the things that were exactly. Shout out to Lyndon B. Johnson for putting us in this mess in the first place. I mean that very sarcastically for those listening. But no, it's crazy, because this opportunity is a huge part of all of it. You take a mother from Utah, you were okay, right? Long-term, big picture kind of thinking, like you've been okay. You've been able to heal, recover, and, move on essentially with life. And, through divorce and all the things since then, you moved on. Same for myself as well, because we're able to do so. But I'm also biracial, and so being able to see these things in a different aspect, it's like, well, this doesn't happen in Oakland, this doesn't happen in the Bay Area, to where these mothers are okay, right? To where they're successful, to where the fathers are involved. Because it's more commonplace to where they're not involved, or there's not even the opportunity for care, or it's too expensive to get care. It's too expensive to afford living. So if you can't afford living, how are you going to afford the insurance? If you can't afford the insurance, and how are you going to afford to even have a baby, kind of thing? And so you're stuck in this system, and there's no way you can even get care, which is the big part of it here too. And it's unfortunate.
I do want to leave people like a positive note though, which some of the things in birth are quite simple, right? Like learning to
Mhm.
be present, learning to be comfortable unmasking, learning to like truthfully the things that make birth better is almost always nutrition, food, presence, and listening. And those things, food does cost money, but are within most people's ability. I feel like there is more in our control than out of our control. And,
Mhm.
I really appreciate you for making a podcast like this that's specifically reaching out to people who otherwise not too many dads are going to listen to, like a mama's podcast, so it's nice that you're taking this information and making it accessible to a whole another group of people that really need it, that didn't have access to it before.
100%. And, I'm a big believer in being informed, whether that's about politics or religion or, all these different things that could affect you as a father. I feel like that's a very important thing, especially as a father, to be informed. You need to be informed of all the things that can affect you, your household, your children, especially things that can affect them now and later. So understanding these things at a high level and being able to at least have some kind of baseline of information to where it's like, I don't know a lot about that. I need to go ask some more questions, or I need to go do some research, or, my wife's pregnant and I'm listening to this, and, I hope and pray that this podcast reaches those dads that really need to hear it, that really need to be able to connect with the podcast, that it'll benefit them and they'll be able to advocate and to be able to stand up for their significant others. So yeah, but let's wrap this thing up and call it an evening. So to wrap this thing up, I like to bring back our little beat here from Podbeat. So I love Podbeat. They turn every podcast into a musical experience. It's great. Susie, you look like you work out. You look like you're a runner, maybe swimmer. I'm not sure. An active gym goer kind of thing. But whatever it is that you do, Podbeat has you covered because you can increase it to keep your cadence. So if you like listening to, the Young Dad podcast, for instance, and you're like, man, this would be so much cool, great, better. It's already great, but how can I make it even just a little bit better? Podbeat. And it enhances your musical experience, your podcast to a musical experience. You can up the volume to break up all the extra white noise at the gym and so many other things. You can increase the beats per minute to keep the cadence and all those great things. So I love Podbeat, and I also love the June app. I love the June app. JOON. I've been working with them since, I don't know, episode 89 of the podcast, and this is episode 1 something of the podcast. So a very long time I've been working with the June app, and absolutely love them. If your children struggle with behavior, habits, routines, anything like that, June has you covered. It integrates a game that kids love. It's like Tamagotchis, but 2024. So June absolutely crushed it with that. To where you take care of your little
Tamagotchi
pets.
where you're your own pet.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's so cool how June has kind of taken that concept, applied it to kids, but also taken it to help create behavior habits and routines. So let's say I'm gonna pick on Zoe here because she's older. But let's say she struggles with cleaning her room or something, right?
Yes.
And you can put this as a task in on June, and you can put also, kind of lay up tasks as well. But you assign like a coin value to these tasks. And so they complete these tasks on their thing, and then it goes to you as a parent on the parent side of the app. There's a parent app. And so you go in and you have to verify the task, and there's two ways that you can do it here. You can either take it, check it off, say, cool, you did it, yada, yada, yada. Zoe just got away with half-assing her room. Or the or here, what I highly recommend you should do, is you can take it, okay, cool, Zoe completed her task, go to go check her room, room's half-assed. And then now you get to have a conversation. Okay, hey, I can either give you half of your coins, or I can give you, 10 minutes to get it cleaned up, get it how it's supposed to be, and then I'll give you the full amount of coins. Because these coins can be redeemed for a bunch of different things, and you can make custom redemptions as well. So let's say she's working toward going to a movie with you or something, or she wants to work toward a really cool backpack or whatever she's into, right? She can stock up all these coins in the app, and then she cashes the in. Yeah, and then she cashes these in on your side. And she's like, hey, mom, I got all my coins. I'm buying this. You just have to make sure you deliver that. But it's super cool. Can't recommend June enough. There's a link direct to listeners to where you can try June for free. And then, of course, you use the code YoungDad, YNGDAD. You can save some amount on your annual subscription. So, with that, Suzie, the last question I like to ask everyone on the podcast here is kind of like my closing question, kind of like the question of the hour is, let's say a young mother comes to you that's, I don't know, 19 to 23 years old, super young, having her first child, just really scared, nervous, anxious. She doesn't know what the heck's one thing from another, all the fun, all the stuff, right? And you get to give her just one, maybe two pieces of advice in that moment.
Yeah, I think especially when we're really young, that it can feel like there's one right way to do something, and that, if you make the right decisions, you're guaranteed an outcome one way or the other. And I would say it's not. In the process of being pregnant, of parenting, meeting your baby, falling in love with your baby, learning to cultivate joy in this new family unit you have, is a process of discovery, which is really fun. So go make mistakes, do a few things wrong, keep the things that work for you, throw out the ones that don't, take the advice that works for you, shut the rest out. It's all about find the things that bring you joy, and your family will grow and grow and grow, and your love and happiness will continue to grow.
I love that. Absolutely love that. And then just for the listeners here, if you're watching on the YouTube machine or videos on Spotify, you'll be able to see this. The She Burst Bravely website. It's literally sheburstbravely.com. Super easy to find. This is where the listeners can find more of you, connect with you, read all the articles and everything, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. And best place to get a hold of you is through website, correct?
Sure. Email is contact@shebirthsbravely.com. I'm also on Instagram. You can message me there as well.
Perfect. Well, Suzie, I have loved this conversation. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your time, and I appreciate you just spending this time with me, with the listeners today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here.